Who's the best offensive line in the NFL today? Offensive line is often a position that gets overlooked in terms of rankings, but I thought it would be interesting to see who I believe has the best and the worst offensive line in the league, because it certainly is very important and dictates a lot of the time how good a team can be. For more NFL content, make sure to subscribe to this channel and like this video for more. And without further ado, let's get right into the rankings. At number 32, I have the Chicago Bears. I think the Chicago Bears offensive line simply has the most flaws in the NFL. They did not score very well statistically last season. They were 32nd in adjusted sack rate. And really, when I look at this offensive line, Borum is not good. Jenkins is really a question mark at this point. He has potential. The guards are decent, but they're not great. And Lucas Patrick is not a very good center. So the offensive line in general is just pretty weak. And with a running quarterback, it's going to have to be strong. And that's just not a good sign going forward for the Bears offense, combined with the fact that I don't think they're particularly well coached. And I think you have the worst offensive line in the league in Chicago right now. At number 31, I have the Seattle Seahawks. I think the Seahawks and the Bears are pretty clearly at least two of the three worst offensive lines in the league. The reason why I think the Seahawks have a little bit of an edge is I think they were a little better last year and they were a little better statistically. And I do see more upside with this line. So they've got Austin Blythe, who has been a good player in the past. Now that was with the Rams, which helps him, but it is still, he's still shown more than some of the Bears guys. And also Charles Cross, I like out of the draft, and I think he can be helpful. Damian Lewis has been decent in the past, but was not good last season. Gabe Jackson and Jake Kurhan on the right side are not very good. So the Seahawks offensive line is certainly one of the weakest in the league, but I don't think it's quite the worst in the league right now, simply because I just think they have a little bit more upside than Chicago does right now. At number 30 of the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think the Steelers fall in the same kind of camp with the Seahawks and Bears for who's the worst line in the league. The Steelers were statistically the best out of the three last year, though, which is kind of the reason I have them the highest of those three. And the other reason would be James Daniels, who was pretty good last season, honestly, ranked 19th by PFF. The rest of the offensive line, though, Kevin Dotson took a step back last season. Tackles are not good, and Mason Cole, in what I've seen of him, is not a very good center. So this offensive line certainly has a lot of work. I also think Big Ben helped it a little bit with his quick release. So certainly one of the weakest offensive lines in Pittsburgh after so many years of having a great offensive line. I do think they are rebuilding it, and so far they're in complete rebuild mode, which is why they're so down. At number 29, I have the Atlanta Falcons offensive line. The Falcons offensive line, to me, is a lot stronger in run blocking than they are in pass blocking, which may actually help their offense a little bit. You look at the players, though. Chris Lindstrom, elite guard, has been for the last 2 years one of the best in the league at his position. Jalen Mayfield, though, on the other side, was a complete disaster last year, was not even starting caliber. So that is a question mark. Will he be better? We'll see. Jake Matthews has always been good at left tackle. Matt Hennessy is solid overall at center, but is very imbalanced. He's great in run blocking and poor in pass protection. And I think Caleb McGarry at this point has just wasted most of his potential and is pretty much a bust at this point. This offensive line did, I think, also, like the Steelers, have the benefit of having a veteran quarterback last season, which helped them a little bit. So without that, that may hurt them. And I don't think they're quite in the worst of the worst, but I certainly think they're one of the worst in the league. At number 28, I have the Las Vegas Raiders offensive line. The Raiders offensive line, I think, is a unit that of these bottom five offensive lines probably has the most upside. I think Colton Miller is awesome at left tackle. But outside of that, I think there's question marks. Leatherwood was not functional even last season. He should be better, but they need him to be better. Illuminor has played in the system with McDaniels before, and he was all right, but He's nothing special. Denzel Goods, whatever. Andre James, kind of the same thing. He's a starting caliber center, nothing much more. So this offensive line, I think, does also benefit from Josh McDaniels and his power scheme. And because they have a truly elite player at left tackle in Colton Miller, that raises them up a little bit in my mind and gives them some more potential for the future. But as of right now, there's too many holes to rank them much higher than this. At number 27, I have the Tennessee Titans offensive line. And traditionally, when you think of the Titans offensive line, you think big, you think powerful, you think very good in run blocking and solid enough in pass blocking. That wasn't necessarily the case last season. They were pretty good in run blocking, but not as elite as they've been, and very sub-average in pass blocking. I really like Ben Jones and Nate Davis in the interior, but Ray Duns is still an unproven player at right tackle. I think Taylor Lewan took a step back last season significantly, and Aaron Brewer is a significant downgrade, in my opinion, from Roger Saffold. So this offensive line, I think, got a little worse in run blocking, and they're still questionable in pass blocking. And there's just too many questions for me to honestly put them very high, even by their reputation. So would it shock me if the Titans were higher than this? No. But I'm worried a lot about the pass blocking from this offensive line and combine that with a worse run blocking line, and I think they are straight up just probably going to be one of the worst in the league this season. At number 26, I have the Jacksonville Jaguars offensive line. The Jags offensive line is headlined by the new addition to the offensive line, and that is Brandon Scherff. They were also quite decent in pass blocking last season, at least statistically. But outside of Scherff, it's pretty questionable. Tyler Shadley's not very good at center. Ben Barch and Cam Robinson on the left side are pretty weak. Robinson has gotten a little bit better, but he's still not great. And Jawan Taylor has just been awful ever since he's been in the NFL. So this offensive line is, I think, elevated by a truly elite player. And I don't actually think the coaching on the offensive line is actually that bad. But because of the weaknesses everywhere else, they have to be down here, despite how good I believe Brandon Scherff to be. At number 25, I have the Arizona Cardinals offensive line. I think the Cardinals offensive line right now is overrated. And that's because they have names, like people know who DJ Humphries and Justin Pugh and Rodney Hudson and Will Hernandez are, but they're not actually very good. Or at least based on last season, they weren't very good. You know, Humphries has been very good in the past, but was not very good last year. Same with Rodney Hudson. Justin Pugh, I do think, is regressing at this point. And Will Hernandez is a player that has been in the league, I think, 4 seasons now, and he hasn't been good in any of them. So Will Hernandez, even though he's a name, is not a good player, and Kelvin Beachum is not a starting caliber right tackle, in my opinion. So this offensive line gets points for being decent last season, and potentially having players that have shown that they can be very good in the past. But it's still, when you actually look into some of the individuals on this line, it's still probably one of the worst in the league at this point. At number 24, I have the Houston Texans offensive line. The Texans offensive line is one that I can actually see being pretty decent this season. They were actually 3rd in pressures allowed last season, and they have interesting players. So Laramie Tunsil didn't play much last season, has been very good in the past. Not sure if he will be this year, but he could be. Kenyon Green, I really liked out of Texas A&M in the draft, who they got. AJ Cann has had success in the past. Justin Britt's all right at center. He's not the best, though. Titus Howard is not very good, but he is moving to tackle, which I think he does play better than guard. So the Texans offensive line has promise. It's just there's not a ton of certainty to it right now, which is why I have to hold it back on this list. At number 23, I have the Carolina Panthers improved offensive line, and the Panthers offensive line certainly is improved from a year ago when it was arguably the worst offensive line in the NFL. Tyler Moton is a good right tackle. Austin Corbett on paper should be a good right guard. He was last year, and Bradley Bozeman, same thing with him at center. So we'll see how they adjust to a new system. It may take them a bit, but they are good players on paper. Brady Christensen is the question mark. I think at left guard, he's still probably going to be a weakness. Ike Mekwanu, I expect to be good right away, though. So this team could have a very good tackle duo and could be solid in the interior. They have a lot of upside because of how bad they were last season and because of all of the new parts. I have to dock them a little bit for that just because of the lack of continuity. But this is an offensive line certainly that has potential to be higher than this next year. At number 22 is another offensive line that has improved in the offseason. That is the Miami Dolphins. Now, the Miami Dolphins offensive line, like the Panthers, added a lot of high-end talent. Teron Armstead, when he's on the field, is one of the best tackles in the NFL. Connor Williams graded very well and had a pretty good year last year for the Cowboys, but the thing is, he's listed as the starting center right now, and he played at guard last season. So it'll be interesting to see how he adjusts there. Robert Hunt also was very good for this team last season. The problems for me are Eichenberg and Jackson. Eichenberg, we haven't really seen much of, so we don't really know. He's a question mark. And Austin Jackson just straight up wasn't very good last season. They're moving him back to tackle, so we'll see. But overall, I'm not completely sure. I'm not very high on him overall. And because also this offensive line was very bad last year, they're adding a completely new scheme along with that. There's question marks here for sure, but they'll certainly be better than the incompetent unit they were last year and at least give Tua enough time to throw. At number 21 are the Minnesota Vikings offensive line, and gone are the days of the Vikings offensive line being a shoo-in for bottom 5 in the NFL. They have slowly over the last 2 years crept up to the middle of the pack. I think that starts with Brian O'Neill, who I would say is the most underrated player on their team right now. He was very good in pass protection last season. Darrisaw was also decent, and I think will only get better in year 2 after they picked him, I believe, in the first round last season. Ezra Cleveland has been solid. He's not been great, but he's been capable. Bradbury is probably the weakness here. I don't rate him very highly at center, but he has shown some potential. And Ed Ingram is a rookie out of LSU who's a complete question mark. So the offensive line, I think, is pretty solidly not awful, but it's pretty solidly not great. They're probably going to be between the 16 and 22 mark in the NFL solidly. But I do see some upside with guys like Darrisaw and even Ingram on this offensive line right now. So at number 21, the Minnesota Vikings offensive line. At number 20, I have the New Orleans Saints offensive line. Gone are the days of the Saints offensive line routinely ranking in the top 5 for a multitude of factors. Number 1, they were not very good last year. They were quite banged up. Teron Armstead is gone. Trevor Penning is replacing him. He's a rookie. We don't know how he's going to do yet. Ryan Ramczyk is the opposite side of him. Ramczyk is great, even though I wouldn't say he's had the best last 2 years. He's still one of the best tackles in the league. But the inside is where I'm concerned with this offensive line. Andrews Pete is a player that didn't really play a ton last year, and he's been inconsistent. He's been weak in pass protection, but great in run blocking. Eric McCoy had a down year last season at center, and Cesar Ruiz was just straight up a meme last season at right guard. So they should probably be better with another year of experience, but there's a lot of questions right now with this offensive line, and without Sean Payton and Drew Brees, who helped, I think, augment them a bit over the past couple years, I'm not completely sold on them. But they still have enough talent to me to crack the top 20, which is why I have them here. At number 20, the New York Giants offensive line. The Giants offensive line, again, another team that did really poorly last season, but has improved for sure. I think the two big things on this offensive line is the right side. It's Mark Lewinsky, added from the Colts, one of the better guards in the league, and Evan Neal, who was my favorite player in the NFL draft, coming in at right tackle. I expect to be an instant contributor and instantly become a just below Pro Bowl caliber player in year 1. John Feliciano is not great, and he is playing at center when he was playing at guard last year, so that'll be interesting. Max Garcia is still a huge question mark at left guard, but Andrew Thomas has steadily improved year by year out of Georgia at left tackle. So Thomas, I think, helps them move into this top 20, but because of the questions at left guard and center, I can't put them much higher. But I do think, again, like the Panthers and the Dolphins, this is an offensive line that has upside and has improved. At number 18, I have the Buffalo Bills offensive line. For such a great team, the team I believe to be the Super Bowl favorites right now, offensive line might be one of the Bills' few weaknesses. And not even as though it's a weakness, because it's not a bad offensive line by any means, but it is one of the question marks of the team. They were decent last year in some statistics, good in some statistics and bad in some statistics. They were pretty middle of the road, to be honest. And you look at the depth chart, Deion Dawkins, really good left tackle. Roger Saffold will help bring a physical element to the run game along the offensive line, which helps. Mitch Morse is whatever at center. Ryan Bates has been all right at right guard, but he's not been great. And Spencer Brown is the big one. I don't rate him very highly at all. This offensive line has a decent amount of continuity, and they are bringing in an upgraded left guard. But honestly, I do think Josh Allen saves them a lot. So I'm expecting them to be, an average offensive line, which is right about where they land at number 18. At number 17, I have the San Francisco 49ers offensive line. The 49ers offensive line, one of the best in the league last year, without a doubt, especially in run blocking. I think Trent Williams was the reason for that. Trent Williams had potentially the greatest tackle season since at least 2006, according to PFF last year. Do I think he'll do that again? Probably not. Do I think he'll still be elite? I would say so. He is a little bit older now, but I would still project him to be at least close to that level. McGlinchey's coming back at right tackle, which helps. He's a very good run blocker. Is a little bit sus in pass blocking though. Daniel Brunskill does have experience in this system, but I don't think is particularly a very good player. Aaron Banks, I expect to be solid at left guard, but I don't know if he'll quite be Laken Tomlinson. And then Brendel at center is a question mark. He's the listed starter right now in place of the retired Alex Mack. So this offensive line certainly took a step back because of the losses at left guard and center. But I would still expect them to be physical and great in run blocking. I think pass blocking is what may worry Niners fans a bit, and I can see that. But overall, this is still a Kyle Shanahan offensive line, so you'd expect them to still at least be solid. At number 16, I have the Washington Commanders offensive line. This is the part of the list where we start to get to the offensive lines that are actually pretty good. Washington didn't have the best season last year, but the starting five of this line is pretty strong. You look at Leno and Cosme, each were decent last year. Neither were great. Norwell and Turner, kind of the same thing. Turner had a bounce back year last year. But Chase Roulier is one of the better centers, if not one of the best centers in the NFL, and he does elevate this offensive line. This offensive line is just overall really solid. I'm not completely sure if Carson Wentz makes them better, which is why I may put them a little bit lower, but really solid offensive line, and to me, a top half unit. At number 15, I have the Denver Broncos offensive line. One of the first things people were saying when Russell Wilson got traded to Denver was, is the Broncos offensive line good enough? Can they hold up? And to that, I'd say the Broncos offensive line is probably an above average unit. At least they played close to that level last season. Garrett Bowles at left tackle is the star. He was one of the best tackles in the NFL in 2020 and took a slight step back, but was still good last season. Dalton Reisner's always been good at guard. Miners on the other side had a solid year last year. Cushenberry actually proved to be decent at center as well. The only real huge question mark, to me at least, is Billy Turner at right tackle, who has not been great. Now, Wilson is a complete different ask to a guy like Bridgewater or even Locke, but this offensive line, I think they may actually have the players and the ability to protect him. And I think this is the best offensive line Russell Wilson's had in years. At number 14, I have the Los Angeles Rams offensive line. Now, if we were doing this off last season, the Rams would be instantly in the top 5, arguably even top 3. They were that good last year. I was really impressed with the Rams offensive line. They had the number 1 pass blocking offensive line according to PFF. They were great. But there is some turnover here. You do still retain David Edwards at left guard, who has been a solid player for you the last 2 years. Brian Allen, one of the better centers in the league last season, and Rob Havenstein, who's been pretty good for a while now. But left tackle and right guard are the question marks. You lose Andrew Woodworth, who was a stalwart of that offensive line, consistently an elite player. Joe Noteboom comes in, was decent for you in the playoffs when he played last season, but we still need to see him do it in a larger sample size. And Logan Bruce is a rookie coming in at right guard. We don't know how he'll be. Now, I am confident that McVay, because of how good his scheme is, and still 3 of the 5 starters coming back is decent. So this line does retain a little bit of continuity, and they play in a scheme that I think will augment them. But it is, I think, pretty clearly a weaker offensive line than it was a year ago. At number 13, I have the New York Jets. The Jets' offensive line is another offensive line that really improved last season from already being a decent unit. You look at this offensive line, Connor McGovern at center, graded as a top 10 center in the NFL. George Fant has become better over the past couple seasons. He's now, I think, at least quality left tackle. Laken Tomlinson comes over from the Niners. He's been one of the better guards in the NFL for years. Elijah Vera Tucker had a decent rookie year. You'd expect him to take a jump. And Mekhi Becton didn't play a ton last season, but was really good in 2020. So you would expect this offensive line as a starting 5. The only real question is continuity, because they're solid to me across the board. But because of the continuity questions, I just leave them off my top 10. But again, if they were a top 10 unit by the end of the year, it would not surprise me. At number 12 up, the Baltimore Ravens offensive line. The Ravens are a little similar to Jets in terms of, I think they have top 10 potential, but I need to see it a little bit first. So they add Tyler Linderbaum in the draft, who was good, very good in college, was my favorite center in the draft, one of my favorite offensive linemen. So he should be good for them, but he's still a rookie. Zeitler, who was good last season, is still there at right guard. Ronnie Stanley is coming back. When he last played, he was arguably the best offensive lineman in the NFL. Morgan Moses is a solid right tackle, nothing more. Tyre Phillips is really the only question mark at left guard. He is coming from being a tackle last season, but did not play very well. This offensive line, though, they're big, they're powerful, they'll be able to play Ravens football again. And because of this offensive line, it's making me higher on the Ravens, because it was not a very good offensive line last year, and I think it should be a lot better this season. At number 11, I have the Los Angeles Chargers offensive line. The Chargers offensive line a few years ago, complete disaster. That is far from the case anymore. It has become one of the better units in football. Rashawn Slater was great last season as a rookie at left tackle. Corey Linsley's been the best center in the NFL cumulatively over the last 2 years. Matt Filer's been good for them at left guard. The questions are on the right side with Zion Johnson, who's a rookie, but I do like him. And then Pipkins at right tackle, who didn't play a ton last year. He's a question mark, but he does have some upside. The Chargers, just in general, offensive line-wise, they're really strong. They have 3 really good players and then 2 players with upside. And to me, it's a unit that I think is better than I think people thought last season as well. So the Chargers offensive line comes in just short of the top 10 with a lot of potential to get in there. At number 10, I have the Indianapolis Colts offensive line. There was a time a few years ago the Colts were pretty unanimously considered the best offensive line in football. I would say around 2019 or so, but those days have passed us by. Although we still have similar players on this Colts offensive line. You look at Quentin Nelson, still there. Ryan Kelly, still there. Braden Smith, still there. All of those players are very good, even though they, especially Nelson and Kelly, didn't have necessarily quite the seasons you would have thought last season. I expect them to get back to their best in 2022. The real questions here are left tackle and right guard. Now, right guard I do think is a legit question, because whether it's Reed or Danny Pinter at right guard, we haven't seen much from them. So that is a question mark there. They also didn't play as well last season as they have in the past, so that's why I'm dogging them a little bit. I do think, though, at left tackle, Matt Pryor is being a bit slept on. He was actually pretty decent when he played last season. So the Colts offensive line is certainly one, especially in run blocking, I can see being very good. but I don't see them quite as strong as they used to be, though still pretty strong. At number 9, I have the new and improved Cincinnati Bengals offensive line. The Cincinnati Bengals offensive line has gone through a complete reshuffle this offseason. You look at the additions of Ted Karras at center, who is coming over as a guard, or being converted from a guard. But Karras has been, I think, consistently a good player. You look at Alex Kappa, really promising and just overall good right guard for the Tampa Bay Bucks, who's played well in big moments. And then Lyle Collins, one of the better right tackles in the NFL, along with Jonah Williams, who was already pretty promising at left tackle. Now, Jackson Carman at left guard is probably the question. He was a player that played early in the year, didn't play very well, and then he got hurt. But he's at least a player that is entering another year into the system. You bring in over a little bit more continuity. This offensive line was horrible last year. It was the weakness of this team by far, and they still made the Super Bowl without it, or despite it. But I think with improved players overall, they should be a much better line. Now, it may not show immediately because you're rotating or you're inserting a lot of players in, but by the end of the year, a lot like the Kansas City Chiefs last season, I expect this to be one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. At number 8, I have the Dallas Cowboys offensive line. The Cowboys offensive line is going through some reshuffling this season. Obviously, they lose Connor Williams, but this is still, to me, a strong unit. You look at Tyron Smith. The key with him is health, but when he's on the field, he's awesome. He was last season. McGovern is a solid guard. And obviously, Zach Martin is one of the greatest guards of all time, still is one of the best today. Tyler Biadasz has been a player that has had promise but hasn't really lived up to it, but he's still more than a starting caliber enough center. The real question mark with this offensive line is Terrence Steele to me, because Terrence Steele just is not good at right tackle, and he weakens this offensive line. Combine that with some of the chemistry issues, and that puts them down a little bit when statistically last year they were, a top 3 offensive line. But this offensive line, don't get it twisted, still one of the best in the league and should be this season. At number 7, I have the Kansas City Chiefs offensive line. The Chiefs offensive line, especially in the interior, is legitimately awesome. You look at Joe Thuney, one of the best guards in the league, has been for years. Trey Smith, who was really awesome last season as a rookie, and Creed Humphrey, who I already think after just 1 year, he was the best center in the league, and I think today he is the best center in the NFL. So that interior might be the best in the NFL. I think the tackle position is it's a lot like Dallas, in which they've got an inconsistent / injury-prone player with Orlando Brown, who is great in some games but is not so great in others. And then the right tackle spot is not ideal, Andrew Wiley, but he is a player that has been in the system for a while, and they've got good depth, which is what I like about them a little more than Dallas. So the Chiefs' offensive line by the end of last year, I thought was one of the best in the league, and I still think they are today. And in fact, I might be undervaluing them at 7. To me, they're one of the elite offensive lines in the league. At number 6 of the New England Patriots offensive line, despite the turnover on this line, it's still really good. It was really good last year, has been very good, and it still is to me. You look at the offensive line, David Andrews, one of the best centers in the league, has been for years. Michael Onwenu, one of the best guards in the league. Trent Brown, a good player, not an elite player. Isaiah Wynn, kind of the same thing with him. He is in a prove-it year. But that tackle duo is fine. And Cole Strange, even though everyone's memeing him, and I didn't agree with the pick at that position, he's still probably going to be pretty good because this offensive line is coached very well traditionally. And New England's just very good with developing offensive linemen. He also is he's still probably, if he was going to be picked in the first round, is going to be a starting caliber guard at least. So unless he's a disaster, this offensive line is going to be, to me, still one of the best in the league, as it has been for many years, because they've still got multiple elite players on this offensive line. At number 5, I have the Green Bay Packers offensive line. I'm really high on the Packers offensive line coming into the 2022 season, and that's because of really one reason. The Packers offensive line last year was pretty consensus top 10 in the league, and they were missing their best player, David Bakhtiari, one of the best tackles of this era. Now, he should be coming back. Will he be his absolute best? I don't know about that, but he should still be good. And you pair Bakhtiari with Jenkins, two players that have had chemistry together, and just in general, great players. I'm expecting that to be one of the best tackle duos in the league. The interior is a little bit more questionable, but still, you've got young players like Runyon and Myers who are both, promising, and I'm expecting to get better with more continuity. The Packers' offensive line, again, like the Patriots, very good at developing, very good with coaching and all that stuff. So the Packers' offensive line, I'm really high on entering 2022, and I'm expecting them to be one of the best offensive lines in the league. At number 4 of the Detroit Lions offensive line. The Lions offensive line has been getting a lot of hype in this offseason, and there's a lot of good reason for why. The Lions offensive line does not have a single weakness, I don't think you can say. Taylor Decker was and has been just straight up just always been good at left tackle. Never been elite, always been good. Vaitai had a pretty solid season last year at left guard. Jonah Jackson had another solid season. Penei Sewell was very promising his rookie season. I'm only expecting him to get better. And the thing with this offensive line was they were solid last season, but they're now adding Frank Ragnow, who was a top 3 level center when he last played in 2020. So this offensive line is really good, and I'm only expecting them to get better in 2022 to the point where if they were the best offensive line in the league, it would not surprise me whatsoever. At number 3, I have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offensive line. The Bucs offensive line is experiencing some turnover, but I still think it's going to be maybe 98% as dominant as it was last season. Last season was probably the best in the league when healthy, and they're going to be right up there again this year. Donovan Smith has just been solid to very good for this team for many years now. Still is. Tristan Wirfs is probably the best tackle in the NFL. Shaq Mason coming in kind of as that Marpet replacement, I guess, as the elite guard on the team, you could say. But he is filling in for Kappa's spot, is one of the best guards in the NFL, and still has chemistry with Brady from back in his New England days. So even there's not as much of a question mark. Ryan Jensen is a very good center, and Aaron Stinney is maybe the only question mark on this team, or on this offensive line, but he's filled in pretty well. He did in the playoffs at least. He's filled in pretty well for the Bucs offensive line whenever they've needed him. So this offensive line is still really good. It's still really good in pass blocking. It's still really physical in run blocking, and it still will be one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. My number 2 offensive line for the 2022 season is the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns offensive line has been dominant the last 2 seasons, specifically in run blocking. You look at the Browns offensive line, they have the best guard duo in the NFL with Joe Bitonio and Wyatt Teller, both players that graded as top 5 players at their position last year by PFF. Jack Conklin's been very good for them at right tackle. They have Jedrick Wills, who has not been great, but I do think is a promising player that is only getting better. And the only real question mark, I guess, is Nick Harris, who hasn't played much and is a question mark filling in for J.C. Treader at center. But this offensive line is really talented. It's really good. It's been really good. And I'm expecting to only be just as good as they've been. So, coming in at number 2, I have the Cleveland Browns. And at number 1, the best offensive line in the NFL, according to me, entering the 2022 NFL season, is the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles, to me, are the only offensive line that does not have a clear hole. Jordan Mailata, one of the best tackles in the NFL, at least last year. Lane Johnson, still one of the best tackles in the NFL, Hall of Fame level player. Jason Kelce at center, Hall of Famer, and still one of the best centers in the league. Landon Dickerson, very good left guard, only getting better. Was a beast at Alabama, was very good for the Eagles last season. Isaac Samalu, the only player who you could probably say is not very good to elite on this offensive line, but he's still pretty good. He's been pretty good in his NFL career, and when he played last year was also pretty good. So the Eagles' offensive line was one of the best last season, and I'd say is only getting better with more continuity and some of their younger players getting a bit better. So to me, the best offensive line in the NFL today is the Philadelphia